princess and was reportedly furious, not just at Sarah Ferguson, but at the spectacle their crumbling marriage brought to the royal family. The scandalous photographs of John Bryan and Fergie in France didn't just spark outrage in the press. They ignited a crisis behind palace doors. And public condemnation underscored what many within the monarchy already feared. If you love getting the real story behind the palace walls, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and tap the notification bell so you never miss an update. That Andrew and Sarah's reckless behavior had pierced the family's protective shell. The couple's actions forced internal reckonings, confrontations, and eventually a tightening of control that sought to contain the damage, though it may have come too late. What followed wasn't just a tabloid-feeding frenzy. It was the unraveling of a royal dynamic that had defied conventional expectation for years. Sarah and Andrew, despite divorcing in 1996, continued to cohabitate at Royal Lodge, projecting unity even as the ground beneath them cracked. But as scandals mounted and Andrew lost his official residences, the illusion crumbled. Their prolonged entanglement, marked by denial and dysfunction, became a living reminder of the chaos that unchecked privilege can create. This saga isn't over, and its consequences are still rippling through the royal institution today. If you love getting the real story behind the palace walls, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and tap the notification bell so you never miss an update. It started with a royal wedding, ended in disgrace, and left behind a trail of scandal so messy even Buckingham Palace couldn't sweep them under the rug. Sarah Ferguson and Prince Andrew were never the picture-perfect couple the palace tried to sell. Behind the balcony waves and coordinated photo ops was a marriage crumbling from the inside, fueled by emotional neglect, reckless choices, and an almost unbelievable level of entitlement. This wasn't a one-off misstep. It was years of behavior that spiraled into one of the most dysfunctional royal partnerships in recent memory. From the beginning, their relationship was rocky. Sarah Ferguson, or Fergie as the press loved to call her, was thrown into the royal spotlight with little preparation and even less support. Andrew was often away, physically absent and emotionally distant. And while the public saw smiles, the reality behind palace doors was cold, lonely, and full of tension. That emotional disconnect set the stage for what would become a pattern of impulsive decisions and quiet betrayals. Fergie's alleged affair with Texan millionaire Steve White wasn't just a fling. She reportedly called him the love of her life. A telling statement, considering she was still married to the Queen's son at the time. The affair wasn't subtle. It was whispered about in royal circles long before it hit the headlines. Her relationship with financial advisor John Bryan was even worse in terms of public fallout. That vacation in France. The infamous photographs. Bryan shirtless, Fergie in a bikini, and his mouth on her toes. That single image detonated what was left of her reputation. The backlash was instant. The tabloids erupted. The palace panicked. And Princess, and never one to mince words, was reportedly furious. She didn't just criticize behind closed doors. She reprimanded Sarah publicly. In royal terms, that was an all-out declaration of war. But here's where things went from scandalous to outright surreal. Because while Sarah was getting torched in the press, Andrew was far from innocent. He had his own trail of behavior that flew under the radar for far too long. Multiple sources accused him of inviting women, some allegedly escorts, into Buckingham Palace. Not quietly, not discreetly, just casually bringing them into one of the most secure and symbolically sacred royal residences in the world. No clearance, no regard for protocol, just complete disregard for the institution he represented. It was reckless, it was arrogant, and it was happening while his marriage was disintegrating in full view of the... But it didn't stop there. Andrew's alleged connections to known criminals and controversial figures added fuel to the fire. His behavior, already questionable, began crossing the line into full-on scandal territory. The palace was dealing with one PR crisis after another, and at the center of so many of them was Andrew. Despite all this, after their official divorce in 1996, Sarah and Andrew continued to live together. Yes, you heard that right. They divorced, but they didn't separate in any real way. They moved into Royal Lodge together and carried on raising their daughters as a team, publicly branding themselves as a happy divorced couple. But behind the curated smiles was a relationship built not on romance or reconciliation, but on mutual damage control. Because by that point, neither one of them had much left in terms of public goodwill. Sarah was broke, out of the royal fold, and still hounded by those infamous. Andrew had his titles, but his reputation was slipping fast. Living together at Royal Lodge was less about affection and more about survival. They weren't rebuilding, they were hiding, and it worked. For a while, they managed to maintain the illusion of a functional post-divorce arrangement. But scandals don't just disappear. They simmer, and eventually they explode. Andrew's name resurfaced again and again in the press, each time tied to new allegations, new associations, and new levels of public disgust. And still, Sarah defended him. She gave interviews praising his character. She said he was misunderstood, that he was a good man. But every statement only made the situation look worse. Because the more she spoke up for him, the more people wondered, why was she still so close to someone who had become a walking royal disaster? Meanwhile, inside the palace, things were shifting. Andrew's position was no longer untouchable. Senior royals, including Princess Anne, reportedly pushed for consequences. Not just gentle nudges or quiet reprimands, but real action, stripping of titles, reduced privileges, and eventually eviction from Royal Lodge. It was a symbolic end to a facade they had maintained for years. Once Andrew was removed from his longtime residence, the strange, codependent partnership he shared with Sarah effectively ended. Their final connection, the one thing that kept their lives intertwined, was gone. But let's be clear, the downfall didn't happen in one dramatic moment. It wasn't a single scandal that brought them down. It was years of behavior, years of ignoring consequences, of believing they were somehow immune to the rules everyone else had to follow. Their repeated indulgences didn't just erode their reputations. They exposed a culture of impunity that sat at the heart of their relationship. This wasn't a tragic love story. It was a textbook case of privilege gone unchecked. Sarah's loneliness may have been real. Her emotional struggles may have been valid, but they don't excuse the choices she made. And Andrew's arrogance, his repeated disrespect for protocol and disregard for the institution he was born into, wasn't just foolish. It was dangerous. They enabled each other. They protected each other. And in doing so, they prolonged the damage. Instead of cutting ties, they leaned in. Instead of accountability, they offered excuses. And in the end, the public saw through. The monarchy, for all its flaws, relies on public perception. And when that perception crumbles, so does the institution's credibility. The toe-sucking, the escorts at Buckingham Palace, the scandals that never stopped piling up, they weren't just personal failures. They were national embarrassments. Today, Sarah and Andrew are no longer in the spotlight. Not really. They exist on the periphery, reminders of what happens when personal misconduct meets royal privilege. Their story isn't over, but the days of carefully managed PR and protective palace statements are long gone. What remains is a cautionary tale about the cost of indulgence, about the danger of unchecked power, and about how even behind palace walls, accountability eventually arrives. So what do you think? Was this just a messy marriage that spiraled out of control, or something much deeper, a reflection of systemic failure within the royal family? Let's talk about it. Drop your thoughts below. Was Sarah loyal to a fault, or simply complicit? Did Andrew believe the rules didn't apply to him, or was he just lost in a world that never taught him consequences? Like, if you followed this chaos from the beginning, share if you think someone else needs to see what really went down behind the palace gates, and subscribe for more royal scandals, celebrity train wrecks, and pop culture implosions that prove no one, not even royalty, is safe from. There's something undeniably unsettling about how long this circus went on. Not just a marriage, but the entire post-divorce spectacle. For over 2 decades, Sarah Ferguson and Prince Andrew existed in this strange public-private purgatory, propping each other up like the last 2 guests at a royal party no one else wanted to attend. By all external measures, their relationship should have ended cleanly in 1996. Divorce finalized, public statements made, go their separate ways. But that's not what happened, not even close. Instead, they hunkered down together in Royal Lodge, effectively living like nothing had changed, refusing to let go of the roles they'd once played. Sarah kept showing up at royal events. Andrew kept calling her family. And the public was left wondering, what was this? For a long time, people gave them the benefit of the doubt. Co-parenting, friendship, emotional support. But over time, the excuses started to wear thin. Because this wasn't just about shared parenting. This was about shared damage. A kind of mutual dependency built not on affection, but on convenience and, frankly, survival. Sarah was no longer working royal. She had no title, no official role, and no consistent income. Her past was littered with financial mishaps, questionable business deals, and a very public attempt to sell access to Andrew for £500,000. Meanwhile, Andrew was still clinging to the last threads of royal status, even as his behavior kept triggering backlash. They needed each other, not out of love, but out of necessity. And that's what makes this entire saga so hard to look away from. Because it's not just a story of a marriage that failed. It's a story of two people who couldn't, or wouldn't, move on, who kept dragging the monarchy back into their mess long after everyone else had tried to clean it up. Even as the Epstein scandal exploded, and Andrew's already shaky reputation took a nosedive, Sarah stayed loyal. She gave interviews saying she stood by him 100%. That he was a good man. That the media didn't understand the real Andrew. But each time she spoke, it only made the situation worse. Because her loyalty started to look less like compassion and more like complicity. The reality is, Andrew's behavior wasn't just inappropriate. It was dangerous. Inviting women into Buckingham Palace without clearance wasn't a tabloid blunder. It was a full-on security risk. He treated palace protocols like guidelines, not rules. And the fact that it was allowed to go on for as long as it did says a lot about the culture of entitlement surrounding him. And yet, even as the palace quietly removed him from public duties, even as he lost titles and privileges, even as Royal Lodge slipped through his fingers, there Sarah was, still orbiting, still present, still trying to convince the public that this was all just... But the public had moved on. They'd watched the BBC interview. They'd heard the excuses. They'd seen the lack of remorse. And no amount of Soft Focus magazine features or talk show appearances could undo that. By the time the eviction from Royal Lodge finally happened, the illusion was completely shattered. This wasn't a story about two exes who remained close for their children. This was a story about two people who refused to grow up, to take responsibility, or to face the consequences of their actions. And what's most disturbing is how long they were allowed to do it. How many people looked the other way. How many headlines were brushed off as unfortunate or private matters. The royal family, for all its efforts to modernize and manage public opinion, still clung to a deeply outdated playbook when it came to handling scandal. Delay, deny, distract. But in the age of social media, with 24-hour news cycles and endless online receipts, that strategy doesn't work anymore. You can't PR spin your way out of toe-sucking. You can't sweep royal privilege under the rug when the evidence is front-page news. And you definitely can't pretend that inviting escorts into a royal residence is just bad judgment. The Sarah and Andrew saga revealed the cracks in the royal facade. It showed the limits of image control. It exposed the human flaws behind the titles. And it left the public with a lingering question: how much damage had to be done before someone said enough? In the end, the palace did say enough. Andrew was removed from his duties. His titles were stripped. His privileges were revoked. Royal Lodge was taken back. It was a rare moment of accountability in an institution known for its resistance to change. But it came too late. The damage was already done. And Sarah? She's still trying to rebrand. Writing books. Appearing in interviews. Talking about forgiveness, resilience, inner strength. But her legacy is forever tied to one of the most embarrassing chapters in modern royal history. A chapter that could have ended cleanly but was drawn out by years of denial and delusion. Their story is a case study in what happens when two people refuse to let go of power, even when it's already gone. When image matters more than truth. When privilege shields you from reality until it doesn't. And while the world watches the next generation of royals try to modernize, the Sarah and Andrew chapter stands as a reminder. The past is never really in the past. It lingers. It echoes. And when the truth finally surfaces, no title, not duke, not duchess, not loyal ex, can protect you from a fallout. So what's left? A stripped-down version of their former lives. No titles, no royal duties, no lavish estate, Just two people facing the consequences they spent years avoiding. And maybe that's the poetic ending they never wanted. Not a palace, not a public comeback, just silence, irrelevance, the slow fade into history that comes when the public finally turns a page. But the story still matters, because it shows us the cost of unchecked behavior, the toll of enabling, and the price of pretending everything's fine when it's very clearly not. Sarah Ferguson and Prince Andrew aren't just a scandalous footnote in royal history. They are a warning, a cautionary tale about what happens when entitlement overrides responsibility, when loyalty becomes a liability, and when two people mistake shared dysfunction for devotion. So if you follow this saga from the start, if you remember where you were when those infamous dropped, if you've ever wondered how the royal family kept letting it happen, now you know. At this point, it's almost hard to believe how long they got away with it. Sarah Ferguson and Prince Andrew's bizarre post-divorce arrangement wasn't just some eccentric royal quirk. It was a red flag waving in broad daylight. Two people, officially divorced since 1996, still living under the same roof, still defending each other in the press, still attached at the hip like nothing ever happened, all while the world watched their reputations unravel in real time. Let's not forget, this wasn't some private healing journey. This was a public spectacle wrapped in royal branding, sold as an unconventional love story, but built on a foundation of chaos. Because while they insisted they were the best of friends, what they really were was a human PR strategy. Each was the other's shield, Sarah softening Andrew's image, Andrew providing Sarah with proximity to power. And let's be honest, that proximity meant something. After her divorce, Sarah lost her Her Royal Highness title, her official royal duties, and much of her public support. But by staying close to Andrew, physically, emotionally, publicly, she kept just enough relevance to stay in the royal sphere. Not quite in, not quite out, always lingering, always visible. That visibility came with perks, events, invitations, media attention. And for Andrew, having Sarah around allowed him to lean on the one person who would never walk away, no matter how ugly things got. And they did get ugly. By the late 2000s, Andrew's private behavior was already causing palace headaches. The reports of him bringing unauthorized women, some reportedly escorts, into Buckingham Palace? Not only inappropriate, but a complete breach of royal protocol. This wasn't the side wing of some private country house. This was a working royal residence with international security, diplomatic guests, and, most importantly, a global reputation to uphold. Sarah had her own disasters, financial issues, the sting operation where she was caught offering access to Andrew for money, public apologies, book deals, dramatic interviews. It was a rotating cycle of scandal and redemption. But the core problem remained. Neither of them ever truly took responsibility. Not in a meaningful way. They both defaulted to the same script, misunderstood, mistreated, misrepresented. And that victim narrative only worked for so long, because eventually people stopped buying it, especially when the consequences finally. The public watched year after year, as headlines piled up. Sarah being reprimanded by Princess Anne, Andrew's questionable friendships, their bizarre continued cohabitation. And through it all, the palace said very little, until it couldn't anymore. The Epstein scandal detonated what little cover Andrew had left. His now infamous BBC interview was the royal equivalent of setting yourself on fire on live TV. And even in that moment, when the monarchy was scrambling to distance itself, Sarah still stood by him. Publicly, loudly, she called him kind, loyal, a good father. Maybe all of those things were true in private, but to the public, it sounded like deflection, like denial, and worse, like protection. Because at the heart of all this isn't just a messy relationship. It's about accountability. It's about power. It's about how two people, both born into or married into a system built on hierarchy and secrecy, managed to twist that system in their favor for as long as they could. Even after Andrew was stripped of his military titles, his royal patronages, and his public role, there were reports he was still living in comfort, still staying at Royal Lodge, still moving as if he hadn't been officially exiled. And yes, Sarah was still there, too. But the tide had turned. Public patience had run out. Sympathy was gone, and the palace, clearly feeling the pressure, finally acted. Andrew was asked to leave Royal Lodge. And when that door closed, so did the final chapter of their shared public life. Without Royal Lodge, without the illusion of a united front, they could no longer hide behind their amicable divorce. What was left was a truth. Two individuals whose refusal to let go, to evolve, to face their own failures, had become a burden too heavy for even the monarchy to carry. Sarah's attempts at reinvention continue. More books, TV. She speaks of healing and strength, often without addressing the root issues that tainted her public image in the first place. It's all very sanitized, very controlled, but it lacks what people are actually looking for: honesty. As for Andrew, he's faded into the background, no longer a working royal, no longer in the family spotlight, no longer welcome at the events that once defined his life. And while the palace may never issue a detailed account of everything he was involved in, the silence speaks volumes. What we're left with is a story that exposes the fragility of the royal image, the way power can be used to stall accountability, but not stop it, the way loyalty, when misdirected, becomes enabling, and how the public, more informed and more skeptical than ever, won't sit quietly while powerful people rewrite history in real time. Sarah Ferguson and Prince Andrew built a relationship that defied logic, a post-divorce partnership that confused the public and frustrated the palace. And in the end, it collapsed under the weight of their own, not because the media was unfair, not because the public was too judgmental, but because they were given chance after chance, headline after headline, warning after warning, and still chose the path of least accountability every single time. So now we ask, was it really love? Or was it just legacy management? Was Sarah loyal, or trapped in the illusion that defending Andrew somehow salvaged her own image? Was Andrew just careless, or did he truly believe the rules didn't apply to him? Let us know what you think. Are they victims of their own choices, or symptoms of a much deeper problem within the royal system? Drop your thoughts below. If this deep dive into royal dysfunction gave you life, go ahead and like the video, share it with someone who still believes in fairy tale endings, and hit that subscribe button for more drama, more truth, and more behind-the-scenes breakdowns of the powerful people who just cannot help themselves. Because one thing for sure, this story, far from over.